you ever would. Welcome to episode number 1 of Pittsburgh Hockey Now here on the CW Network. I'm Dan Kingerski of PittsburghHockeyNow.com. Let me introduce to you our brand new co-host. We call him the Professor. No, not Professor Xavier. It's Professor Bob Healy, author and TV host. Bob, thanks so much for joining us here on the maiden voyage. Coming up on today's show, we'll look at the Metro Division. There's a thumper who can give the Penguins some fits. We'll look at our favorites of the Eastern Conference who might be able to give the Penguins a run for their money. We'll also take a look at some Division I hockey. RMU, Robert Morris, is in Niagara this weekend. We'll have a report from our own Ashley Chase on that coming up. And, of course, Bob, the face-off segment. We get to no holds barred, have at it.
Are we arm wrestling, or are we just going to talk?
I want a chance. It'll be verbal.
Okay. All right,
So that's what we've got on today's program. The Penguins dropped the puck this week, Bob, and as you can see here, they tweeted at us last night on the Pittsburgh Hockey Now Twitter account. This from @DeathIdol as the banner goes up in Pittsburgh. A couple straight Stanley Cups. But the off-season questions still lingering now into the season for the Penguins.
Not to start the face-off segment early, I'm not as worried about the Penguins roster as you seem to be. I
think to win a third cup, I think they have to settle this now.
Yeah, but there's always turnover in the salary cap era. I think they were relatively lucky to get through as unscathed as they are. I mean, they lost some players who I think are replaceable. I think Greg McKay actually had a really good game last night.
Well, here's what they have to replace. You can see here Nick Bonino and Matt Cullen. They've got to replace this right in the middle of their lineup. You can see Matt Cullen, a fourth-line center, put up 31 points last year. Not to mention what a leader he was in the locker room. Is Carter Rowney going to be that guy who puts up 31 points? I don't think so. So,
maybe the guy who puts up those points is still out there. Let's talk about Riley Sheehan.
Well, let's talk about that domino that hasn't yet fallen. Because Derek Pouliot dealt to the Vancouver Canucks this past week. There goes the piece that was going to Detroit for Riley Sheehan. And you can take a look here at Sheehan. It took him 82 games last season to get goal number 1, and then he popped a couple in the final game. In the final game here at the Joe, going to the net. The last few years, Riley Sheehan actually scored at a clip greater than Nick Bonino did the last few years, except for last season when he just completely went in the tank with 13 points.
Yeah, how hard did you have to do to find that goal, Riley Sheehan? Because there weren't that many of them. And he was a very minus player last year.
Yeah,
I know
he had a bad year last year.
Yeah. Well, yeah, people have bad years. I mean, I do see that as someone who could join the Penguins and make a positive impact. I think Greg McKay, personally, with such a good training camp, looked good in opening night. I'm willing to see how he goes. You don't personally think, I think I got this from you, that the Penguins don't owe Greg McKay anything. If there's someone else out there,
well, owing a player is maybe the wrong word you want to use. I think he had a great training camp. I think he would be a very serviceable fourth-line center. That's what you want from a guy like that. He played out of his skates in Game 1. There were a couple gapping issues, but that's Game 1 kind of stuff. Can he play that way in 2 months? That's what Greg McKay hasn't done in 4 previous NHL stops. He hasn't followed up a great game with a run of great games to cement himself in anyone's lineup. Now, we talked about Sheehan. The problem is that deal is done. They had to make that deal. The Penguins moved on from it. They dealt Pouliot to Vancouver. So now we're into that second tier, and the Penguins have to find Plan B, Plan C, Plan D. And that's the tough thing. Because let me give you some inside dirt here on what's going on with the Penguins. Sources telling me that Russian free agent Denis Zaripov, who was suspended for 2 years from the KHL, can't play in the Olympics this year, is now NHL eligible. He is waiting on the Penguins. Sources confirming to me that, in fact, Zaripov is looking at the Penguins. Okay, guys, let's get this done. But the Penguins can't move until they get that third-line center. That's what all sides are reporting to us at Pittsburgh Hockey Now. But that's the domino that has to fall.
You wrote an article about this on Pittsburgh Hockey Now, PittsburghSportsNow.com.
Pittsburgh Hockey Now.
Okay, thank you. So there, you can see it coming up here as a graphic, Dan's article on potential centers for the Penguins. So talk me through some of these guys.
Well, there's one that I keep coming back to. I know the Pittsburgh Penguins, sources have told us they talked to Boston about Ryan Spooner. Spooner is a bit out of favor in Boston. His defensive game leaves a lot to be desired. His physical game leaves a bit to be desired. He's not killed penalties. He's not played that typical third-line center role. So initially, the Penguins, I'm told, passed. There were some people in the organization who said, nope, thanks but no thanks, Boston. They've come back to that because they're looking for additional options, and they could get Spooner at a reduced cost.
Well, speaking of Ryan Spooner and his defensive prowess on the ice, we have a couple graphics we want to show you. Here they are now without Spooner and with Spooner. We're looking at shots against with Spooner there on the right and without Spooner on the left.
Yeah, you take a look at the graphic on your left without Spooner. Look at the center of the ice. A heat map. That red is bad. That means the opponent is getting lots of shots. You look at on the right with Spooner on the ice, and so I think maybe the knock on his defensive game is overstated. That's the problem with hockey, Bob. It's such a front porch community that when you get a reputation, it sticks to you. He's only 25 years old. He's a young guy, plenty of time to elevate his game, and you saw there when he was on the ice in his defensive zone, the other team was not getting great shots in front of the net, and that bodes well for a centerman.
All right, well, that's the Penguins offseason pretty much. Let's jump to the rest of the Metro Division. So the Columbus Blue Jackets, you're very high on them.
I absolutely love Columbus. They're heavy, they're fast, and most importantly, they're hungry.
Well, we have a graphic here. I want to show you two players acquired recently by the Blue Jackets. We're talking Artemi Panarin and Tyler Mott. So take a look here at Panarin and Mott. Those are the numbers, but maybe off the numbers. What do you like most about these guys?
Artemi Panarin is the high-end offensive talent the Columbus Blue Jackets have been desiring for 20 years. Since they came into the league and the nationwide arena was brand new, they've been dying for high-end offensive talent. They finally have it in the Breadman. They had to give up Brandon Saad, who's a wonderful 200-foot power forward, but he wasn't John Tortorella's cup of tea, and Tortorella wasn't Brandon Saad's cup of tea. So they send Saad back to Chicago, where Chicago's getting the band back together on a mission from God, the whole 9 yards.
Don't you blaspheme in here.
I wouldn't think of it. I'm get right.
No, they have star power. How about their depth? Let's take a look at the line combinations for the Blue
Fantastic
Jackets.
depth in Columbus. They needed a third-line center. Oh, by the way, they've got Nick Foligno, who slides from the wing back to the pivot. A couple years ago when Foligno did the very same thing in Columbus, he had a career year, over 70 points, made the All-Star game. You look at the depth there, just right down the middle. Wenberg, great year last year, finally broke through. Foligno, Dubinsky, fantastic third-line center. And you add in, Cam Atkinson and Matt Calvert, who's a rough customer. And then you sprinkle in the talent like Panarin. Oh, boy, are they good. And I love Seth Jones. And Bobrovsky may have melted down in the playoffs against the Penguins a little bit, but he's still a Vezina-winning goaltender.
I'm with you. No, I'm with you. They're a threat.
Much more than Washington, much more so than Washington. Columbus just eats and sleeps ways to beat the Pittsburgh Penguins. They go to bed at night, how can we beat the Penguins? They wake up in the morning, let's get the Penguins. And so there's that hunger in there, there's that drive, and it's going to be so much fun to watch those battles this year. If you love hockey and you're into the X's and O's, just watch the coaching matchup between Mike Sullivan and John Tortorella. The old friends will go at it. They will make more adjustments on the breakout and the dump-ins in one game than any two coaches in a regular season I've ever seen. They just have a blast doing it. So I'll tell you what, Bob, we mentioned some things coming up. We'll get to the Eastern Conference very quickly.
And we'll touch on the Hurricanes as well.
Yeah, and the Hurricanes. But we also want to check in on RMU with our own Ashley Chase of Pittsburgh Hockey Now. Right back after this.
After back-to-back seasons appearing in the Atlantic Hockey Conference Championship game, RMU is back with just a few new faces on the squad heading into the 2017-18 season. One of the holes that needed filled on this team was a spot on the right wing of the top line of Brady Ferguson and Alex Tonge. Those two combined for 102 points last season, 58 for Brady Ferguson, the leading returning scorer in NCAA hockey. The spot that needed filled, though, was from winger Daniel Levins, who is now playing in the Pittsburgh Penguins affiliate of the ECHL, the Wheeling Nailers. That spot right now being filled by Michael Loria, a junior transfer to Robert Morris, who spent the first 2 years of his college career at UMass Lowell. He's jumped in on the top line and so far is finding some chemistry.
Yeah, those guys are obviously great players, really easy to play with. If you just move the puck, get open, they're going to find you no matter where you're at. So it's been easy so far, and hopefully we can keep it going.
Well, Michael's a very skilled player, and we're extremely excited to have him. And he's been here for a year. He's practiced with the guys. He knows our systems. He lives with Brady, so I think there's some chemistry that way. So we figured let's see if he can step in Daniel Levin's spot, and we'll give him that opportunity and see if he can do it. And if he can, outstanding. If he can't, then we'll go back to the drawing board. But right now, after our 8 hours total in the month of September and our exhibition game, it looks like it's working so far. And we'll just see where it goes long term. But Michael's been great. Michael's been very coachable. He's worked hard. He's paid his dues in his year sitting out as a transfer, and we're excited to have him, and I think he'll be a good addition to our team.
Next up for the Colonials, a road series at Canisius, the team it faced in the Atlantic Hockey Conference Tournament semifinals a season ago. RMU winning that game to advance to the championship game. They'll be on the road at Canisius Friday and Saturday, October 13th and 14th, before returning back here to Pittsburgh for the home opener on October 20th and 21st against Army West Point. From the RMU Island Sports Center, Ashley Chase for Pittsburgh Hockey Now.
From the student television station inside the Liberal Arts College at Duquesne University, I'm Bob Healy. This is Dan Kingerski of Pittsburgh Hockey Now, and you're watching Pittsburgh Hockey Now. PittsburghHockeyNow.com, excuse me. Yeah, on the name. Where'd you come up with it?
You know, we thought for hours about it, and, like Swedish fish didn't quite sound right. So we went with PittsburghHockeyNow.com.
Well, before the last break, we were talking about Eastern Conference teams, the Metro Division especially, but let's get outside the Metro now. You're really high on the Toronto Maple Leafs, as am I. Tell us why.
Love the Maple Leafs. There's going to be a groundswell of fan support. Those fans have waited 40 plus years for a Stanley Cup in Toronto, and I'll tell you what, it's a whole lot closer than it's been in a long time in Toronto. Look at the young players they've got in the blue and white. You've got Austin Matthews and Mitch Marner and Carlson. They added some veteran spice, Patrick Marleau, just to help the kids along in Toronto. They've got a fantastic coach, Mike Babcock. There's so much to like about Toronto. And I'll tell you what, Bob, they had that teaching moment against Washington in round one of the playoffs last year. They took the Capitals to the mat. They outplayed them. A bounce here or there.
Senators, Penguins 06-07. You know, the same kind of deal. Here's some highlights here of Toronto.
Yeah, right there. Austin Matthews. Here's Kadri taking out Brooks Orpik. Here's Leo Komarov. Yeah, you see who he's hitting. You see Leo taking it to Ovechkin there. That's the kind of stuff they can do. They can score. They're a very fast team, very much in that new Eastern Conference mold where speed is the deal. And they've got a bit of grit and physicality. Their defense is a little average, to be kind. Their defense is a bit average, but Freddie Anderson in goal is solid. He was very good in the playoffs last year against Washington. I really like Toronto. And don't underestimate how easy their schedule is going to be. Being in the Atlantic Division, they've got Montreal. Boston is a good team, but Boston is not Columbus or Washington. Mm-hmm. They've got Ottawa. But there again, Ottawa is a trap team. They're not going to pound the bejesus out of the Toronto Maple Leafs. So they'll get through the season largely unscathed. They'll come into the playoffs healthy and hungry and having a lot of fun with a lot of fan support behind them.
We're going to talk Stanley Cup favorites in a little bit, but let's talk about another team in the East because I'm sensing you're feeling Leafs coming out of the East. I am, but let's talk Tampa Bay Lightning.
Well,
they
obviously,
get Steven Stamkos
against
back.
the Penguins. I don't want to put them over the Penguins, although they very well could be.
Well, that's actually my pick. I know maybe I'm jumping the gun. I like Toronto out of the East.
Do you really?
I do. But I would take a look at this Steven Stamkos graphic here because we do want to talk about the Tampa Bay Lightning. They get Steven Stamkos back. Badly,
they do.
Yeah, badly missed him.
Yeah, you know what? Tampa Bay, they had 2 deep playoff runs consecutively. Here's a little cautionary tale for Pittsburgh if you want to think about anything. Tampa Bay had 2 long playoff runs to the Cup final, to the Eastern Conference final. They were 1 goal away from making it 2 straight Stanley Cup finals. Last year, they took the foot off the gas. They got a little bit complacent. They thought their talent would carry them through. It didn't. They didn't realize this until it was too late. Injuries mounted because they had played so much hockey. So you had those concurrent things with Tampa Bay, and it wasn't until the end of the season when they finally put it all together and they missed the playoffs by a single point. 1 point. Had they entered the playoffs, it would have been an entirely different picture in the Eastern Conference.
Let's move on to Carolina.
You like Carolina?
Yeah, I want to talk about Carolina's depth. Let's bring up Carolina's line combinations. I want to take a look at them, and then we'll also talk about somebody else on the Carolina roster. But you can see here, Dan, with the kind of lines they can roll out, I think they stack up actually pretty well.
You know, Bill Peters, the coach, has been juggling the lines a little bit. Sometimes Aho is with Teravainen. They kind of like the countrymen to play together. Jordan Staal being a first liner or a third liner. Jordan Staal maybe on the trading block if the Carolina Hurricanes grab Matt Duchene. There's a couple dominoes that we might look to start falling. Carolina is a wonderful young team. This is the start of their journey. They've been an also-ran or irrelevant for a good chunk now. This is the start of their journey. Ron Francis has been a fantastic general manager. He has hoarded young talent, and grabbing Aho, and you know, no one really knew what the kid was. They knew. And there was a lot of trade offers for him when people began to figure out he's playing over in Sweden. People began to see, oh, this kid is good. He was more than a point per game as a 19-year-old in the Swedish High League. He's going to tear up the NHL, if not this year, by next year.
You mentioned journeys. Let's talk about Scott Darling's journey.
Oh, you got to love Scotty.
Yeah, you like this story. This guy was playing in a level below the Eastern.
Yeah. He was in the ECHL. He even spent some time in the Southern Professional League. There is no more Siberia to hockey, well, than Siberia, than the SPHL. This is where the guys who wash out of the ECHL go. He was there, and he came through the ECHL, and he's been fighting, and he's a really grounded player because of it. He understands what he had to do to get here. He has been improving. A few years ago in Chicago, he was just an ordinary backup who might play 20 games, and there was not much thought about him. He's continued to improve his game and work in the community as well. Carolina's lucky to grab him because of Chicago's salary cap issues, and they're lucky to grab him also because Cam Ward has been subpar. Cam Ward will have a great 2 weeks and make you think that Cam Ward is back, and then go subpar for a month after that. They're really glad and happy to have Scott Darling.
Well, we can't talk about the Eastern Conference without talking about our friends a little bit south in Washington, right? The Washington Capitals. It's easy to pile on the Capitals this year because they got some issues.
It's kind of fun, too.
Of course. Starting with, they just have way too much money tied up into few players. We have a graphic we want to show you here regarding salaries and what's tied up in Washington. Take a look here. That's a lot of money to tie up, especially
TJ Oshie, 30 years old,
right?
8-year contract at almost 6 per. That's a ton of money for a power forward. They begin to really lose their step at 32, 33 years old. He's a power, he's going to be in that same mold. He's not going to score 60, 65 points when he's 36, like Justin Williams, who they allowed to go to the Carolina Hurricanes. And they're very top-heavy. They've got a couple freshman defensemen, they've got a couple rookie defensemen going to have to play a lot. You've got Brooks Orpik still eating up a lot of money in Washington. GM Brian McClellan was very defensive this offseason. He was essentially challenging reporters when asked about the money that he's given to some of these guys. They're very top-heavy. They've got a cup hangover without the cup. So this is the year that Washington will start to give back. If those young defensemen begin to flourish, they'll be good, and they'll be very good in a couple years. But this is that tough transition year, and the money they've got tied up doesn't give them a lot of flexibility to address needs as they go through the course of an 82-game schedule.
Is Alexander Ovechkin washed up?
No.
I say that. I say that knowing. I know it's kind of a double-barreled question, right? Either is or he isn't. I say that honestly, knowing that the guy scored 30-plus goals anyway. Yeah. So that's a very nice way to be washed up. But he's just not the same player anymore. I don't know if it's because now we see the gray hair on the ice and he looks older. He's not jumping into the glass after goals.
Don't be jealous of gray hair.
Well, God only made so many perfect heads, and he covered the rest with hair, Dan. But yeah, that's a very nice problem to have a guy with 33 goals
Yeah.
maybe be on the downside of his career. I still expect Alexander Ovechkin to be obviously a positive contributor for the Capitals, but he's just not the same player anymore. And
Well, that's a good
maybe
thing.
that's okay, right? Maybe
You know,
that's okay.
In part, it's a good thing that Washington is spreading the offense around. They are, he's playing a bit more of a two-way game than he ever has in his career. But there was still the knock on Ovechkin. And let's be honest about this. The knock on Ovechkin in the playoffs was that he tried to do too much. He got out of position. He was a negative in that Game 7. So coming up, we get to take the gloves off. Strap on the foil. Here we go. The no-holds-barred face-off segment is straight ahead right here. It is Pittsburgh Hockey Now. Welcome back to Pittsburgh Hockey Now. I'm Dan Kingerski. As you can see in front of me, you can always tweet me at the now infamous @BudMoonshine. Joined by the Professor Bob Healy. So, Bob, we got the face-off segment coming up in a couple seconds here. Before we get to that, I want to get real quickly, though. Stanley Cup Finals. What does your final look like?
You might take me to task over this. This might seem like the easy call to some people. I have Toronto beating the Penguins in the Eastern Conference Final. I have Edmonton over Chicago in the West. And then when it gets to the Stanley Cup Final, yes, it's an all-Canada final. Put on your toque, get your Labatt. You're going to watch Toronto. You're going to watch Toronto beat Edmonton.
It's a toque, first of all. And two, there's not enough Labatt in Canada for that final.
Well, I've heard toque.
Really?
Yeah. Well, maybe I just hang out different Canadian clubs than you.
I spent enough time working in Toronto
I'll
with
take your word for it,
Sportsnet, and I never heard took.
All right, you win that one. But that's not even part of the face-off. Well, who's your Stanley Cup winner?
Now, I'll tell you what, and I hate to chide the Penguins too hard here. Penguins fans and the Pens are whistling past the graveyard, assuming they can get back to the Cup final without settling this third-line center situation. It's not going to happen without that being settled adequately. Well, we can talk about Greg McKegg all day. We'll see how that pans out, but the Penguins have to really get there. Columbus, on the other hand, Columbus is already there.
All right.
I like them so much.
Well, let's hope their goaltending holds up.
Toronto's really good. I think push comes to shove in the Eastern Conference Final that Columbus, with the weight that they bring in a playoff series, assuming Bobrovsky can actually stop a puck, past April, I like Columbus. In the West, you gotta love Edmonton. McDavid is McSpecial at this point, and you're going to have a Columbus-Edmonton Stanley Cup Final. And I like Columbus.
Wow. Best of 7, Columbus wins that.
Nationwide is going to be rocking. High Street is going to be a party like you haven't seen in Columbus in a good while.
It's a beautiful arena district. I'm not down on Columbus. To me, I actually think Columbus gave the Penguins a better playoff round than even Nashville did. I really
So let's get to the face-off segment here.
Okay.
And topic 1 on the face-off segment is team set up for the biggest flop. Epic fail.
Well,
hyped now, fail later.
I think a team that was hyped last year that's going to fail this year are the Nashville Predators. I wasn't high on Nashville. I'm still not high on Nashville. I think people bought into this idea of this raucous environment and the country stars and the arena noise and all that kind of stuff. I'm not high on it.
Arena noise in Nashville. Hang on.
Go ahead. This guy here, you're public enemy number 1, I think, in some places in Nashville.
Yeah. Let me tell you a story here. Come on in real close. So, a story on Nashville. Some guy on PittsburghHockeyNow.com wrote last year, mostly in good fun, about maybe some amplified crowd noise in the Nashville arena last year.
Is this the guy with the full diaper? Is this the baby, the moron?
The moron, the
I know
schmuck.
this guy.
Yeah, you're maybe sitting about a foot from this guy. It was ridiculously blown out of proportion. Let me tell you the fun story about this. I can tell now a few months later. Right. The RF technician, radio frequency, approached me and one of the national broadcasters who were talking about this. Now, didn't know who I was, so he told the full story. He's like, oh, sure, go out to these speakers and you can hear the crowd noise. It's being recycled through the PA, et cetera, et cetera. And sure enough, there it was.
It happens.
It's not a big deal.
It's not the only arena that happens.
And let me tell you something. You know, these little bloggers who run around finding, you know, the nail to hammer that day. They don't put out good hockey content. They look for somebody to mock and to kill that day. You know, on Twitter.
You were the sacrificial lamb?
I was the sacrificial lamb for a solid week or so. And I wasn't tearful that, you know, that one national blogger lost his job about a month later. I didn't really shed a tear because that's the worst of Twitter, and that was kind of the worst of that whole thing. But I can tell the story now. It was in fun, and it was proven.
All right, that was my pick to flop. Nashville. Who's yours?
Chicago.
No.
Yeah, absolutely.
No. Brandon Saad returns.
You know, if I want my floors clean, I'll call Mr. Clean. But
That's right. Look,
it's the face-off segment.
There's still enough talent in Chicago, and those guys aren't that old
yet. Is that too mean? Am I being too mean?
No, I liked it.
Okay.
I shaved this yesterday.
I've got the Phil Kessel haircut going.
You look like Big Earn McCracken, too. Well, why are you down on him?
Thomas Wolfe wrote, "You can't go home again." And you bring back Brandon Saad, you bring back Patrick Sharp, and it's like getting the band back together. It doesn't really work. They're missing that, I don't know, you just can't recreate that kind of chemistry. And here's more to the point. A lot of those young players they've been stockpiling, the Vinny Hestrozas, the John Haydens, Joel Quenneville, does not give these guys really enough rope to grow. And so as a consequence, you've got these kids in your bottom six who haven't been given enough sunlight to become the big players that Chicago needs to win a Stanley Cup. They'll make the playoffs.
All right.
But they're not going to be that great team. I see another, first round bounce like they had last year.
Let me tell you why everything you said's not going to matter.
Okay.
Jonathan Toews, Patrick Kane, Artem Anisimov, Duncan Keith, Brent Seabrook. Show Dan the tape so he can get a look at what the Blackhawks are capable of, please. Watch this. You're going to see this a lot come May. Come on, what's not to like? Blackhawks have plenty of talent still.
Yeah, there's Kane ripping one past
plenty
Jake
of
Allen.
talent still. I am not as down on Chicago as you. I'm going all the way to the Western Conference Final. I just think the younger, faster team in Edmonton beats them out for it.
Sure.
And then in the Stanley Cup Final, like I said before, it's the youngest, fastest team, Toronto.
Well, you know what? The Western Conference has some really great teams. You know, you've got Edmonton, you've got Anaheim. I also look at Dallas. They've got Ben Bishop now. They've bolstered so much of that lineup there in Dallas. I just don't see Chicago this year being that team that is worthy of the hype.
Well, who is? Who's your biggest surprise?
Biggest surprise?
Coming out of the West.
They're not going to win the Stanley Cup this year, but I want you to watch for the Arizona Coyotes or the Phoenix Coyotes or the Seattle Coyotes. I don't know.
You're a year too fast, I think.
Yeah, I'll tell you what. They've got a brand new head coach. You may know him, named Rick Tocchet. I assume Tocchet learned a few things coaching guys like Jake Gensel, like Connor Sheary, and a guy named Sidney Crosby that he was intimately involved with. Dave Tippett now gone as head coach of the Coyotes. He had them playing like plumbers last year, buttoned up tight and conservative. You've got some kids who can skate. You talk about Derek Stepan as the #1 center. You talk about Domi. You talk about Anthony Duclair, who's a kid they plucked from the Rangers a couple years ago, a power forward ready to come into his own, and Clayton Keller, 7th overall pick last year. Imagine Steve Stamkos, but a little faster. That's what he has a chance to become. I like Arizona where they're headed. They're not going to, they're not going to do, the playoffs this year, but they're going to be really good.
Okay, I don't hate it. I know we're almost out of time. My surprise. Yes, it's still a surprise.
Yeah.
Edmonton, Toronto in the final is a surprise because they're so young.
Okay.
And Toronto wins. I think it's a surprise. All Canada final, Toronto back to the top of the hockey world.
All right. You know what? We've been planning this show and working through various obstacles for about a year. As we bring this very first Pittsburgh Hockey Now to a close, I want to thank Professor Bob here. And I want to thank the great folks at Duquesne University here. This has been trials and tribulations, and hey, we got through it.
Yes, Professor Jim Voda as well, the Duquesne Media Department and the University and the Liberal Arts College in general. You'll see a lot of names. These are some of the students who worked on the show.
For Pittsburgh Hockey Now, Dan Kingerski, have fun.